Today we're on trail reviewing the Priority 600X. I'm excited to bring this review to you. This is such a unique bike. It's very different from anything else I've featured on the channel. You're going to want to go watch the first look video if you're interested in this bike, where I dive into all the details and measure the geo, talk about spec and all that. Today we're focusing on ride feel, what the pros and cons are of this bike for different riders, and who it will appeal to most, and if it'd be a good fit for you. As always, I do my one-on-one bike consultation over on Patreon. I'd be happy to help you over there if you need help picking the right bike for your budget and riding style and your needs. This is a belt drive frame with the Pinion gearbox. I talked a lot about that in my first look video. One thing to note, you can order this with the dropper, and I actually did, but the seat tube's so long that I can't actually fit the dropper in there for my proper seat height. So we're reviewing it without a dropper, which is okay because the way this bike's intended to be used, I don't know that a dropper is going to give me a whole lot of extra capability, but we'll talk a little bit about that more. Let's go hit the trail. All right, so here's my shifter. It's a grip shift. A lot of people hate that. I don't understand why. I love it. I'm in gear 4. I'm just going to dump to gear 9, and I didn't pedal at all. I just start pedaling, and it's in that gear. If you've never ridden a internally geared hub or a gearbox before, it's a very different sensation. I think it makes a ton of sense for a bike like this. So we're going to start out mellow and then get progressively spicier on this trail. We've got these big padded winged grips. And I'll come right out and say it. This bike feels like it's a blend of a hybrid city path touring bike with its very upright feel, back swept bars. It's got a lot of that feel, which makes it a very comfortable ride. One of the most comfortable rides I've ever been on. So, for example, if I were 3 days in a row in Mexico just pedaling on paths like this or streets, this is one of the most comfortable bikes I've been on for that. If I were to buy one, I would size down to the small because of how tall that seat tube is, and because we got a 60 mil stem and then the bars curve forward before they initiate their back sweep. That gives it a long, effective top tube and a long, effective reach here. So the bikes fit bigger than they look on paper. This is Ryan Van Duser's signature bike. I have so much respect for him. He's such a positive force for good in the riding community and a great guy. I hope to be able to ride with him and go bike packing with him one day. He designed this bike and picked the features for it, and I think it suits his style of bike packing to a T. The belt drive has a different feel than a chain. Sometimes you can feel that center track on it keeping itself on, and it just feels different. All right, let's handle some single track. This is the type of thing a lot of people are going to encounter when bike packing or a trail like this. The geometry is so different than the mountain bikes that I normally ride. Much steeper head angle, much taller front end. The front end feels like 4 inches taller than most other bikes that I ride. The back sweep of the bars are nice and comfortable, but it feels like this bike's happier when you're seated on it, just kind of pedaling along rather than charging hard. Okay, here we go, navigating this. So, dump 3 gears without pedaling. Oh, that's really nice. That's really nice to shift before you're there and then you're just in the right gear. All right, motoring on up that. Yeah, this bike is happiest being ridden at 1/10 to 3/10, I'm gonna say. Kind of like a blend between an older mountain bike with its geometry and a flat bar gravel bike, kind of. I like that it fits big tires. The wheels and tires and components are mountain bike components, but the geometry is very much not the same as what you're going to find on most modern hardtail mountain bikes. I think it appeals to people who prefer that more upright, traditional, steer with the bars type of riding. And that's not a dig, that's not a knock. I'm not insulting anyone. Like I said, it's doing just fine along this. I think my older generation of riders, most riders over 50 who are slowing down and want something that's easy to control and comfortable for long days in the saddle, I think they're going to really like this. These Hayes Dominion brakes are fantastic brakes. Let's take it down some spice here. And at the moment, I wish I did have a dropper. They're such powerful brakes. Oh, that's so nice being able to dump 3 or 4 gears at once. You do have to kind of change your brain about how you shift. A lot of people will tell you pinions don't shift under load. Sure they do. They just don't shift under extreme load. When you're just straight up mashing and there's a ton of torque on those gears trying to shift in that moment, the shifter can get a little bound. I do like the low bottom bracket. It gives this bike a planted feel. This bike has so many of the features that people ask for in a bike packing bike. Fork lockout, which does not matter to me in the slightest. Big tire clearance, huge front triangle so you can fit a big old frame bag, which to me I think is overrated. But why not? If you're not using droppers or getting on and off your bike or riding technical terrain, climb that nicely. It's got good slow speed balance with that steeper head angle. It's weird, you can feel the belt when you're putting down torque. You can feel the belt on the teeth. I remember that same feeling when I had my Spot Rocker single speed belt drive. A little bit of vibration, kind of friction in your pedals feel. The idea behind the belt here and why Ryan chose it, from what I understand, and why many people want them, is you technically don't have to lubricate them. You can just wash them off with a hose. At least that's what people say. That hasn't matched my experience personally. I'm feeling the weight. It's tractoring up this, but it's more of a sit back and spin than attack the trail feel, which shouldn't be a surprise given its geometry and intention. It feels very different than a traditional mountain bike. It'll get up this, but I'm tired. Technical climb, nice, it got it. Not bad. So if you were purchasing one of these as a mountain bike and you weren't going bike packing, I don't think this is the right bike. The geometry is just a little too comfort oriented instead of performance oriented. It feels more like a vehicle that takes you to the adventure instead of a vehicle that riding it is the adventure. I don't know if that makes sense. If you want adrenaline and just feeling like a kid on the trail, the geometry and stuff doesn't do that a whole lot. But if your adventure is the sights and getting out there and feeling the breeze going through your hair and exploring new places, this is a wonderful tool for that. But if when you ride, you're kind of pushing the pace, you're trying to see if you can get up something you haven't gotten up before, you love flow and corners and popping off little jumps, just getting a little bit of air, I think there are better choices. And that shouldn't come as a surprise. This thing was built to be a bike packer. This bike has a 600% range of gears. It's nice having that transmission down there by your feet where you just, oh, here comes a hill. I'm going to dump 3 gears, pause pedaling for a split second, and then you're there. It's a tiring bike to ride, but when you're loaded with 20 to 40 pounds of gear, it's going to be a different ride experience anyway. And, an extra pound or 2 here is not going to make a big difference on the bike. I'm getting tired where I normally wouldn't on a bike. I'm fighting the geometry a little bit on this steep section. Definitely more fatigued than normal. Pulling on the bars. The front, my fingers are pulling back on it to get power. But despite the super high stack, the front wheel's not lifting because of that super long chainstay. I don't think I'd want to take this bike into much more technical terrain than this. There we go. It got up it though. I just feel like I did more work than I normally do on my bikes. And it's not the weight. Part of it's the riding position. Part of it is the inefficiency of the Pinion gearbox, which I'll talk about later. These Pinion gearboxes are really cool. They break in the more you ride and get smoother the more you ride, kind of like a roll-off. And all that weight's in the lowest place of the bike, which is really cool. The bike's pretty quiet. Every now and then you hear the belt of the belt drive, and I would argue it's noisier than a chain most of the time. It's interesting, in some gears you get more belt noise than others. The more torque you're putting down in those lower gears, it makes a little more noise, and you feel the vibration through the drivetrain. Part of that could be the Pinion, but I know some of it's the belt drive because it's the same exact feel I got on that rocker. Oh man, this thing's cool though to just cruise. I'm not wanting to push it more than 3/10 on my pace or attack the trail, trying to soak it in more and have an experience. And it totally suits the stuff I see on Ryan's channel, where he'll be in the middle of nowhere riding this bike for days, sometimes on the road, sometimes on Jeep roads. Tour Divide, this would be a very comfortable ride. All right, let's get a little flow. Whoa, steering is totally different than what I'm used to. You feel the gyroscope effect more than modern hardtails. Really interesting. Could be that steering angle with the forward swept and then back swept bars. But just the sitting here position's very comfortable. Closest thing to riding a lazy boy that I've ridden, except for recumbent bikes. Just very comfortable. Where I feel like a full day sitting on this bike, my back's not going to be hurting, and my legs are because I've been pedaling all day, but my joints and neck and shoulders, I've got a nice upright riding position. That difference can't be overstated. That's the number one thing about this bike, how it feels different than any other bike I've reviewed on the channel, is the ride position is far more upright, far more comfortable, and more comfort biased than performance biased. Not to say this bike doesn't perform well, but it's definitely designed with comfort in mind. And when you're crossing continents, riding flatter stuff like this, being hunched over all day just kills you, just wears you out. And I applaud Priority for giving this such an upright riding position to make it comfortable for all day adventures. There was kind of a hard shift. I think it's just breaking in and getting used to itself. I've ridden a Pinion before on a couple zeroed full suspension bikes. This is my first time riding it on a hardtail, and I think it's a great choice for this bike and how it's intended to be used. This is the perfect trail for it. We're just kind of out exploring greens and maybe some blue trails. There's no way I'd want to take this bike on a Black Diamond. If I were bike packing and I approached the Black Diamond section rather than trying to session it, I'd get off and walk. That's just where I'm at with how this geometry is. And I feel like it doesn't want you to get too crazy. Here's a little 8-inch drop. Yeah, it's okay. And that long chainstay does make the bike very planted. That long chainstay means the wheel's never going to want to lift on climbs, even if you're pulling on the front of the grips like this to get torque. That chainstay's so long, the wheel will not lift. In fact, trying to lift it, like right there, takes a Herculean effort. You really got to pull up on those and time it with the pedal to get up and over things. Still, the geometry's not as sketchy as I thought it'd be. I think part of that's due to the handlebar design. Very comfy bar. More back sweep reduces wrist fatigue. Yeah, just a pleasant, smooth experience. If you do take this out in the middle of nowhere, carry a spare belt. The belts aren't cheap. Last I checked, they're about $110. And you got to get the belt that's the perfect length, obviously. So you're not going to wander into a bike shop in Mexico and be like, hey, do you have a Gates carbon belt drive belt? And be like, no, what are you talking about? And if they do, chances are not good it's going to be the right size for your bike. So order a spare belt when you order your bike. Yeah, this is really pleasant. I think this is going to appeal to people crossing continents and putting down long, long days in the saddle where you don't know if you'll hit pavement or sand or single track or rocks. It's just really versatile and can handle many different surfaces. This definitely would not be even close to my first pick for riding the Arizona Trail here in Arizona. I like the Gearbox, and I wouldn't be opposed to a Gearbox for that trail, but the geometry is just a little too old school for me, a little too city path, commuter, hybrid bike style feel for the type of terrain we have in Arizona. And I know Ryan's done it on this bike, and he's done Colorado Trail, and huge props to him. Having ridden over 85 modern hardtails, though, there are definitely modern hardtails I would choose over this for the more technical single track bike packing terrain. This bike's very easy to ride if you don't have strong mountain bike skill set and it's been 20 years since you've been on a bike, or you come from a road bike background or a commuter background. This is going to feel very comfortable, very familiar. You're not going to be fighting it on the trail. I've only wanted my dropper 2 or 3 times today. I just think this suits more fire roads, more flatter terrain. Flatter meaning not 4-foot ledges you got to get up and all that stuff. I think you're going to be pushing this bike quite a bit on the Colorado Trail and the Arizona Trail, whereas some of the lighter, more performance-based bikes are going to be able to pedal through a lot more of that stuff. I don't know if you can hear, but that belt drive's making a lot of noise. Let's listen quietly. The more torque I put in, the louder it gets. It's not a problem, but it's worth noting. I think we've put too much emphasis on bolt-ons for our bike packing bags. To me, they are probably my lowest priority for a bike packing bike, where geometry and ride feel and capability of carrying racks and tire size and all that trumps how many bolt-ons it has. This thing's happiest on non-technical terrain. When you need to put power in and get over a lumpy section like this, it's exhausting. Kind of feels like your tires are full of water. Now we're gonna head down, get a little bit of flow going on this bike. I gotta be careful. In places I would normally be manualing through here and kind of popping off and catching air, there's no way I'm about to try and do that on this bike. It just doesn't suit the nature of this bike or the geometry of this bike. So I'm actually staying seated far more than I normally do, and I'm reeling in my speed, but it'll go over all of this stuff. You just have to slow it down a little. The way I like to run the rebound at my ideal rebound setting, it makes this fork top out. So when I lift the wheel off the ground, the telescoping fork extends really fast with kind of a harsh thud. Let's see if I can get that on camera and get the sound down for you here. It's happened on every one of my Rens, and it's one of my bigger complaints about it. But most people are just going to keep their tires on the ground, especially loaded with bags. And for the occasional clunk you get when it does come off, it's not that bad. But it's a little unnerving when you're used to running a tight ship where the bike just feels solid and you've got no weird creaks or clunks. Yeah, there. You feel it in the bars. It just gives it a slightly low quality feel. So I'm actually preferring to sit right now than stand. Standing doesn't give me a whole lot more bike control. There. Ooh. Oh, that's so nice dumping 5 gears at once. And I actually like the grip shift. I'll take it all day long on a bike like this. Even if a trigger shifter were available, I'd pick grip shift instead on this. I'm riding like at 50% speed and 50% attacking the trail than I normally do, because that's where the bike's happiest. The harder you push it, the twitchier and sketchier it gets. And I realize what this bike's intended for. and it's not pushing it and shredding downhill. It's for carrying loads across continents. I'm not faulting the Priority 600X at all. I just want shoppers to be realistic of their expectations when they get this. This feels like the world's most capable touring and hybrid bike that can handle dirt as well. It feels solidly built too. I don't feel like it's gonna fall apart or break on me. It'd be so interesting to try something like this with more modern geometry, more mountain bike, single track focused geometry. I think it would actually take away from the bike more than it would benefit, especially for its intended use. If you're an enduro racer or you've been racing mountain bikes for years, I think the geometry of this is going to feel like a step backwards. But if you're new into mountain biking or coming off gravel or road or touring or commuting, I think it's going to feel quite at home. I would love this thing as a commuter. It'd be such a good commuter. This does not have a department store feel to it. When you first unbox it, you might kind of get that vibe that, oh, this kind of looks like, you know, can I really trust this? After riding it, it feels great to me. Oh, that takes so much energy to get up those little sprinty bits. This thing does not like to be sprinted. It just saps your energy. And part of that's the inefficiency of the Pinion. Part of it's the geometry. What a beautiful day. I'd probably keep this size bike if the seat tube were a little bit shorter. I'm feeling the poor engagement of the Pinion. When you engage, the Pinion has a ratchet in it, and then the hub has a ratchet, so they both have to take up the slop in them. So for technical stuff, that's less than ideal. Most riders aren't going to pick up on that unless you have a strong mountain bike background and you can feel the difference between most hubs. I think the more casual rider is not going to notice it all, and they're going to love the silent shifting. They're not going to notice the slop in the drivetrain that you have to take up to get the power going forward. This bike is perfect for people who aren't bike nerds and who don't want to be thinking about the bike and just want to be enjoying their experience. If you love bike geekery and thinking about your bike and angles and specs and all that, I think you're going to pick up on some of the little things that make this a lower performance bike from just straight up technical performance. And I would argue you're probably not the right consumer for this. If you want to forget about your bike and just pedal, pedal, pedal so it can take you to some cool places, this is probably the bike for you. So right now I don't feel the inefficiency. I'm sure my muscles do on some degree, but my brain doesn't notice it. But after an hour or two of riding this, I'll be far more fatigued than I'm used to. It's almost like spinning a flywheel on a motor, and the heavier the flywheel, the more exhausted you are, and this has 12 steel flywheels. Yeah, this bike's happier keeping the wheels on the ground. If you like to kind of pop off and drop off of things, you'll start to feel some of its limitations. But for just cruising around and staying on the ground, I love it. I think this is the perfect application for a Pinion, is a touring and adventure bike or a commuter bike. These brakes are extremely powerful. One finger braking. I'm a big fan. Definitely do not need bigger rotors on this, even loaded up. Big, powerful brakes are important on a bike packing rig when you add another 30, 40 pounds to your bike. Really great choice of them to spec these brakes. It's a component that most people are going to overlook, and it'd be an easy way for them to cut some corners and make a cheaper product. But instead they chose the higher ground and put a better brake set on here to help the people out that need it, and they feel great. These Dominions are great. So a little while ago I reviewed the RSD Sergeant, which has kind of got an adventure exploratory mode, and these bikes are totally different. That Sergeant feels more like an old Land Cruiser Whereas this feels more like an old Subaru in Australia that just takes you on the back roads. Not quite as capable, not quite as aggressive, not quite as overbuilt feeling, but still far more capable than it should be. Oh, my grip just slipped. You're gonna want to double check tightening your grips when you build yours up. I didn't, that's on me. I just assumed they were tight. One thing about these winged grips, they do offer comfort. I feel like the angle that you set them at really matters. And sometimes going down steep stuff or steep ups or steep downs, I'm changing my wrist position to get the best use of my handlebar. And sometimes that wing is in the position I don't want it to be. But that's more for technical riding than all day riding here. I think a lot of people are gonna like having that big pad to rest on. These are some of the more comfortable winged grips I've ridden. I feel like they did a great job speccing this. All right, here's a limitation. This bike is just putting down the power. All right, I feel the pinion. I feel the belt. The steeper the climb and the rockier and the more power you have to put down, the less happy this bike is. Definitely more happy on chill, smooth fire roads and pavement and flat single track. I think the 110 mil fork is the perfect amount of travel for this bike. I like the tall stack of the Ren forks. I want to love this Ren fork so bad. There's just a couple things holding me back on it. So even though I think dropper posts are the single greatest invention to mountain bikes, I think for this bike and how it's intended to be ridden, I don't think I'd get a dropper post. Dropper posts make technical terrain come alive and give you a lot of capability in that. I feel like the geometry of this bike kind of dissuades it, even if you had a dropper, dissuades you from tackling technical terrain. And I think I'd rather have the simplicity of no extra cables down there, no dropper to mess with, and just run a fixed seat post. If I were traveling to South America and crossing continents, I think this would make an excellent choice. If I were tackling the Arizona Trail, I would definitely pick something different. Colorado Trail, I'd definitely pick something different. But this can do it. I'm just trying to help you distinguish where its advantages really lie so you can know if it's a good fit for you. In summary, this bike does some things incredibly well. In fact, better than any other bike I've reviewed on the channel. It's one of the most comfortable riding positions. Super tall stack, comfy grips, back swept bars, just a tall riding position. The seat tube angle did not feel too slack. It just felt like I'd want to be in that position all day long, pedaling and pedaling and pedaling. And I wouldn't get home and just be like, oh, my back is so sore. I love the riding position. It definitely has that city path hybrid style feel to it. And I think that's who this is going to appeal to a lot, are people that are looking more for comfort for all day, versatility with being able to put the knobby tires on, the Pinion drivetrain where you can just shift gears without pedaling. You don't have to worry about banging your derailleur on something. You're never adjusting it. It's just working all the time. You just change your oil every year or two and away you go. And it makes a ton of sense for that. Add on all the bolt-ons like rack mounts, water bottle mounts back here, bottle mounts here, underneath the top tube, all over the place. If you wanted a custom bag that didn't have any straps, you could do it with all the mounts there. Personally, I don't find that to be a huge selling point for me and my bikes. My bikepacking bikes, I just strap everything on, and I like straps more than bolt-ons. Bolt-ons take forever to install bags, and sometimes they actually get more movement than when I have straps. But everybody's different, and everybody has different preferences. Those are just mine. I have mixed feelings about the Ren upside down fork. I think it's going to be just fine for the target market for this bike. It's got a smooth ride feel, and I like that. If you keep your wheels on the ground, it's fantastic. And for riding 0/10 to 3/10, I think it's a good option. I like the tire clearance. I like that it's simple. I like that to adjust the bottom out, you don't need to take the fork apart and change tokens. I don't feel like the fork is a high performance fork. This is my third Ren, and every Ren I've had some slight issues that have prevented me from recommending them to people. I'll do a whole review on the Ren forks later. Let's talk about the Pinion. I like the Pinion. in this context so much. I think it makes perfect sense. If you're in Africa, if you're in South America, if you're in the middle of nowhere, the idea of just having the belt be the only real thing that's going to go wrong. Pinions have a reputation for being reliable, at least that's what they claim. Ryan's put thousands of miles on his with no problems. I haven't put thousands of miles on a Pinion. I'm always a little bit reluctant to just trust a complex system like this, so that if something did happen and I was in South America, I doubt there's a mechanic down there that's going to be able to figure out how to tweak this and get it dialed. But if that never happens, who cares? It's not like on our cars, on our Toyotas, when we're driving out in the middle of nowhere, we're worried that the transmission's just going to fall apart. We know it's going to work. And Pinion's starting to get that reputation where you just kind of forget about it and it does its thing. So provided you never have any problems, the Pinion makes tons of sense in this application. The belt drive, I could take it or leave it. It's a little bit noisy. It kind of sounds like when you run fat tires on pavement. It's just kind of got this low hum. This center track of these sprockets line up in the center track of the belt, and sometimes you can just hear them self-correcting. And in some gears, it's more pronounced than others. I find the lower the gears, the noisier it is. I've had a failure with a belt drive on a review bike that had under 100 miles, so I'm a little bit reluctant to trust them. But I think it's going to be a good fit for the target market. Personally, I'd rather have a chain because chains have proven super reliable to me, and I can get them anywhere and tweak them if needed. Overall, I think Priority nailed it for their intended use. I think this would hold heavy loads extremely well. I know I'm not bike packing on it today, but I've bike packed enough and reviewed enough bikes to know this would carry its weight extremely well. For how Ryan rides it, I think this is the perfect bike for him. I can't think of a better bike to suit his needs. And so if you're doing stuff like Tour Divide and your version of bike packing involves a lot of fire roads, a lot of cross country, like crossing countries exploration, I think it could be a fantastic fit for you. If you're trying to set the fastest known time on the Colorado Trail or the Arizona Trail, this isn't the bike to do that on, and it's not supposed to be. This bike is a perfect blend between the hybrid paved trail cruiser and a modern mountain bike. It does both quite well, and its very happy place is somewhere in the middle of just putting down long days, sitting in a comfortable position, carrying gear, and pedaling away and not attacking the trail. After watching Ryan's channel, I expected this bike to be slightly more aggressive and slightly more mountain bike leaning than it is, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. So huge shout out to Ryan and Priority Bicycles for sending this in. I'm going to be recommending this bike to a lot of my patrons, especially those that are putting down long miles, doing more mellow bike packing routes, long days in the saddle, and who prioritize comfort over handling on technical terrain. If you're unsure which bike to get next and you'd like to pick my brain, become a patron today. I'm excited to hear what you think. What are your favorite features? What would you change? And where would you take this on an adventure? Thanks for watching. There's a party in the mountains, and you're invited.